Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if we could take our seats, we're about ready to get started. Boy, this is like the hush of a Gittleman class. This is awesome. Welcome everybody. Wow, great. This is also a who's who of Tufts, and it's amazing to see so many just great jumbo legends in the house today. Really exciting. And we've got lots of people here. I know the whole Gittleman entourage is here as well to help us celebrate our friend Sol this afternoon. For those who don't know me, which maybe probably half of you, my name's Ted Ty. I am longtime chair of the Athletics Board of Advisors, member of the class of 1979, Tufts trustee, and chair of our Buildings and Grounds Committee, so been a little bit involved with the baseball project. I'm really honored today to have been asked to be the warm-up act for Sol. Not an easy warm-up, I might add, but I'm really happy to make him sit very impatiently and wait for me to finish my remarks, and he's already at it, and I can see it. I remember Sol in his class, like always, being in the on-deck circle, kind of being a little nervous as he was getting ready to stand up and, maybe thinking about hitting a filler fastball or something. As I was considering a couple of remarks that I would make in advance here, I thought a little bit of it. I'm a baseball guy, thought about baseball and how it's kind of influenced my life and milestones in my life, and then I said, well, how does that line up with Sol and Sol's tenure here at Tufts? And I could have talked for an hour on that, but I thought of a few things, and I probably could have brought a U-Haul truck with some of the mementos that I have, but I did bring a few props just to make it interesting. So My first game at Fenway Park was 1964, which was actually the year that Sol started at Tufts. It was bat night. I still have my Eddie Brassoud bat. Eddie might have used this bat. I don't know. I don't think so. He was known as one of the worst fielding Red Sox of all time. But anyway, I just remember that day like it was yesterday because it was a night game and I kind of walked out and the greenness of Fenway Park was amazing. Another prop I brought, I have a lot of baseballs, but this one's really special. Phil Permex here. This is a Haverhill baseball. This was used by my father. If you can see it from the back, it's actually got a lot of black tape around it because we didn't have a lot of balls going around in those days. I used this. My father used it when he was a kid in Haverhill. And then as I got a little older, my dream was in 1967. I went to Game 1 of the World Series at Fenway Park, which some of you might remember. Bob Gibson pitched for the Cardinals and also hit a home run in that game, which was really cool. And then to tie it into Tufts a little bit, when I was here as a freshman, on the eve of my first midterm, it was the 1975 World Series. And the Red Sox were playing the Cincinnati Reds, the Big Red Machine, and it was a rain day. And the Reds actually came to Cousins Gym. And in those days, security didn't mean very much. A bunch of us were shagging balls for Tony Perez and George Foster literally on the floor of Cousins Gym, which was really cool. Then a couple of my buddies and I bribed an usher in Game 6 out in the press gate to get into the ballpark. And for those of you who are baseball fans, Game 6 was the Carlton Fisk home run. And we were sitting right behind him. So that was a cool moment, and I did actually not do too well in Jeff Berry's midterm the next day, but managed to survive that. In 2004, a bunch of Tufts guys and I started a minor league baseball team in Worcester. We got a blingy ring, and we sent a couple of guys to the major leagues and actually won a championship. And that brings us, up to an equally exciting event, which is today when, I'm happy to say that I and many others, including a lot of people sitting in this room, played a part in creating Sol Gittleman Park. And we'll be able to watch a jumbo baseball game there in the spring of 2023 when we have Phase 1 completed. A little bit of a dirt bowl today, but we'll go out and look at it in a few minutes. So now on to Sol. Sol never had a problem filling the seats in whether it was his Yiddish literature class, any course he taught at Tufts, whether the topic was German or Judaic studies, biblical literature, or baseball. And many, many alums consider him their best Tufts professor. I took his class, my wife took his class, 2 of my daughters took his class, and we've mailed in our 4 yes votes to that as well. Sol was born in Hoboken to Eastern European Jewish immigrants. He earned his PhD in comparative literature at the University of Michigan. He landed in Medford in 1964, which coincidentally was the same year as the Beatles landed in the U.S., as an assistant professor of German. He never left, rising to serve as provost for 2 decades, and he was named the Alice and Nathan Gancher University Professor in 2003, a title he still holds as Professor Emeritus following his retirement. And I believe Nate Gancher's here today, which is, there he is, really exciting. So why are we naming a baseball field for Sol? What's less known than his many accomplishments at Tufts is the significant role that baseball's played in his life. He was so passionate about the sport at Drew University that by his own admission, he put it far above his studies. He had a tryout, but didn't make it to the minor leagues. And if he could have hit a curveball, we might not have had him at Tufts all these years. Though he turned his attention to a career in academia, he never let go of his love of the sport. He published a great book, great read, on the Yankees dynasties of 1949 to 53. And he's taught the very popular Tufts class, America and the National Pastime. When it came to naming a new field, Sol was the obvious choice. I can't think of a name more closely associated with Tufts University or more closely associated with a real passion for baseball. It's a great way to honor Sol's legacy, as each new generation of jumbo ball players will walk under an arch bearing Sol's name. And I know Sol's pleased he can look out over the center field stands and see his old friend Dan Ungen's field just right behind him. So we're going to hear from Sol, and then we'll pause for a second and we'll take some questions. So think of some good ones while Sol's speaking. And then all of us will make our way across the street for the ceremony. So I'm now delighted to introduce a man whose name will now be mentioned along with Wrigley, Ebbets, Comiskey, Bush, Forbes, and Scheib. Sol Gittleman.
All right. Thank you. All right, I think I turned it on. All right, okay? All right. You know, the most important thing is I invented grade inflation all by myself. I taught these general education courses for which you only needed, all you needed was a pulse and a temperature to get into my classes, and I had everybody would show up because it was the class of default. It just happened that we were trained in those days as generalists. We were trained to teach anything that we wanted. Anyway, I don't want to get off stories that tangents that I didn't intend to. A lot happened between my admission to Drew University and that PhD. Playing Division III baseball in New Jersey was one of the great historical moments of my life. So I'm delighted. I'll talk to anybody who wants to about that, because my youth is still very much a part of who I am. Anyway, I'm up here only as a replacement player. Anyway, I'm really standing in for another Tufts faculty member who passed away, and that's Gerald Gill. I'm not sure how many of you had courses with Jerry Gill. He was here from 1980 to when he died in 2007. And he combined for me, for the first time, the two topics that I'm a little bit passionate about, and we're going to talk about briefly this afternoon. That is American baseball and American history. Because the two are inseparable. They both are as American as apple pie, in a way. And whatever you think of as apple pie, or what you think of as American history or American baseball. He convinced me and taught me how the teaching of each reflects deeper understanding of each other, so that baseball can help you understand what America is all about, and America can help you understand what baseball was all about. He also was the first generation of Tufts historians, those that came in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s, who really elevated the teaching of history and the research in history to another level. He understood archival research. They understood something. They were not just teaching what America thought that it was. And they had other evidence, other ways of astonishing. The digging up of archival information in the last 30 or 40 years has been extraordinary. So the teaching of history has changed. A lot of people don't like it. We have our myths, we have our American narrative, and that's the one that we often like to believe. So the back and forth of who we are and what critical thinking has to be in the teaching of American history, Jerry was the first one who introduced me to that. He also taught American sports history. He taught American Civil War history. He taught American history in the 19th century and 20th century. He taught the history of race in America for the first time, really, in the history department. Jerry's favorite word to me was arguable. He would say to me, "That's arguable. That's arguable." He was detached. He was passionate, but he was detached. So when I asked him, "Jerry, what do you feel about this?" He says, "None of your damn business." There were things that he didn't want to tell me about because he didn't want me, he treated me like a student occasionally, and that was good because he didn't want me worrying about what he was thinking about something. That becomes the great challenge for anybody who has the power of grading. If you have the power to put a grade on an exam, you don't want to tyrannize your students. So you keep your opinion out. Talk about controversial subjects, but keep your 2 cents to yourself so that they don't have to worry about, am I saying something that's pleasing him or not pleasing him? So that was my introduction to Jerry, and Jerry is the guy. He arguably deserves to have this ballpark named after him, just as arguably there are one or two other people that started. When we also wound up becoming involved in baseball history at this university. Well, there is no baseball major. But as it turns out, we've got now, well, first of all, we have two of the finest American historians of the 20th and 21st century who we produced. Gordon Wood at the beginning of the 1950s and Jill Lepore at the end of the 1980s. So we should be proud of ourselves, of our contribution as a university to the teaching of American history. The other thing that is astonishing is the number of Tufts undergraduates, without having baseball as a major, who have gone on to careers in the administration of Major League Baseball. We currently have a dozen students who, with their English majors, their political science majors, their economics majors, one in comparative religion, one in engineering, who are now vice presidents for baseball operations or general managers of the Tampa Bay Rays, the Washington Nationals, the Cleveland Indians, the Chicago Cubs. Suddenly, out of nowhere, it became a career path. So liberal arts education is the gold standard. Major in anything you want, and then go out and do anything you want. It only happens in America, frankly. We make a lot of mistakes, and we screw up a lot in higher education. But the one thing that we haven't screwed up is the liberal arts education. Major in something, major in anything that you like, and then go on and do anything you like. These dozen young men and women who have graduated in the last 15 years have gone on to do something. If anybody should have a ballpark named after him, it should be Andy Andrus, who's sitting right here. Andy taught the a sabermetrics course in the experimental college. All I did was teach baseball history. They liked baseball history, but what got them their jobs in the winter meetings when they went down and interviewed with other general managers was their knowledge of baseball statistics, and that they learned from that man sitting right in the middle there, Andy Andrews. Are you still teaching it online, Andy, or are you doing it here at Tufts at all? No. No, he's a BU faculty member, but the only place you get a job at that time teaching baseball was on the experimental college. So he did it, and he's been doing it for years and years. And out of those classes came the students who now have found these remarkable career paths into professional baseball administration. The other thing I wanted to remind all of you you come from various parts of my background, my history, 50 years ago, 60 years ago. Some of the first students I had are now in their 70s. I mean, it really blows your mind when you think of it. And how old I am and how old I've become also gets to me. But I wanted to remind you that what I said to you, or what was said to you when commencement started, when you had commencement, was you pay for 4 and you're apt to get the next 40 free. And that's what this is. You're not coming back just to see old friends, to dedicate a baseball field, or see a night football game. You should be still learning. And if that Bunsen burner hasn't been lit for you, then you ask for the refund. But meantime, coming back for these sessions like this, it's got to provoke you a little bit. We'll have enough time with Ted taking over for you to ask the questions that maybe have been on your mind. If you read about higher education in the newspapers, very few people have a good word to say about us. And yet we remain the envy of the world, and we will hope to keep that position in the world. We'll find out. So yes, you pay for 4, you get the 40 free. After 4 years, it's called commencement. That's the very, very beginning of it. So keep going, keep learning, and keep studying. The other good news is you have lived through the golden age of American history. You think about what you've seen in historians of America in the last 10 or 20 years. David McCullough, Doris Kearns Goodwin, John Meacham, Bernard Bailyn, the academic historians like Oscar Handlin, John Hope Franklin. History has exploded, and the ability to deal with archival information has made history something that it's never been before. And that's part of what baseball is all about and what American history was all about. I grew up in the 1930s. So what was the learning of history through my earliest years, 30s, early 40s, and then World War II? 5% of American high school graduates went on to college in the 1910s and 1920s. Nobody went on to college. It was a privileged group of white, male Protestants who went to American colleges who were taught by white, male Protestants. That was the environment that lasted all through the 10s, the 20s, the 30s, and even into the 1940s. That's who we were. That's how we learned our history, whatever the mythology was. What did we learn? Where did Americans learn their history in the 1930s, 1940s, and early 1950s? Even in the depths of the Depression, when nobody was going to college anywhere in this country, 80 million Americans every week went to the movies. And that's where you learned your American history. You didn't learn it in high school. Not everybody was going to high school. You certainly didn't learn it in college. Nobody was going to college. 5% of all available high school students. So where did you learn it? What did you learn and what did you know? Well, you have no idea what the impact was in 1936 of Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind. First as a novel, and then in 1939 as a movie. These were the templates of American history. That's how you learned your Civil War history. That's how you learned who were the good guys and who were the bad guys. And that tradition of the American motion picture, that's where you learned how Errol Flynn dealt as George Custer, dying with his boots on. The great heroism of the little round top, the little big tree, how he died and survived, and didn't survive, but was heroic in his struggles in South Dakota. That was the template we learned. Then we went to war, and all those characteristics of patriotism, American exceptionalism, and everything that we wanted to be came to play in World War II. Hollywood went to war, Hollywood taught us our history, and that's where you learned it. Now, what was going on in baseball that was really, in a way, complementary to what the country was all about? America was a nation that was constructed in the 30s and 40s. If you saw the Ken Burns program on the Holocaust recently, the Holocaust itself was something fascinating, but the picture of America in the 1930s, the picture of Charles Lindbergh, of Henry Ford, of Father Coughlin, that's who we were in the 1930s. That was America, pretty much unified. 85% of the American people had a positive attitude toward Charles Lindbergh. I mean, he could have beaten FDR as president in that third term with that Wendell Willkie. He just didn't want to be president. But that's who America was. And the defining event of that period took place during World War II when a recently commissioned lieutenant in the United States Army stationed in Texas got onto a bus and was told by the sergeant driving the bus, "Go to the back of the bus, boy." Now, that lieutenant, recently commissioned's name was Jackie Robinson. He did not like being talked to by a sergeant and told to go to the back of the bus. He refused to. The sergeant called the military police and had Lieutenant Robinson arrested. Lieutenant Robinson was arrested in Fort Hood, Texas, went up before a courts-martial and was freed, was exonerated, was said not guilty, but the Army knew that they had on their hands a pushy black lieutenant and wanted no part of him, and suggested that perhaps he would be happy with an honorable discharge, which he took, and then returned to play baseball with the all-black Kansas City Monarchs of the Negro National League. Why is this part of American history? It's 1944. World War II and the American Armed Forces were totally segregated. Whites and blacks did not live together. They didn't fight together. They had nothing together. And so the story we learn in Gone with the Wind, which avoids it completely, that's the template, that's the historical narrative that Americans had overwhelmingly bought into. I had bought into it as a 7 or 8-year-old kid. That's where I learned my American history as well. So in 1944, without us knowing about it, the Civil War struggle began. Now, what about Major League Baseball? How is that reflected in its history compared to American history? That first great interface of 1944 when Robinson refuses to go to the back of the bus. What do we know about baseball? Like America, it was a white man's game. It had been a white man's game since the best player of the 19th century, Chicago Cub first baseman named Adrian Cap Anson, A-N-S-O-N, who was ensconced in Cooperstown, Hall of Fame, great heroic person of the 19th century, the greatest ball player of the 19th century, early admission to Cooperstown, said he would not set foot on a field that had a black man on it. That was 1887. The owners said, okay. They agreed. The players agreed. And from 1887 until Jackie Robinson set foot on the field at Ebbets Field in 1947, baseball was an all-white game. Was America. Who thought about it? I don't know. I was just a kid growing up. But something was happening in America as we noticed what the characteristics were of a country that was going through something that it didn't understand and didn't even know that it was going through it yet. We were unaware that President Truman in 1948 signed an executive order. He couldn't go to Congress for a law. He signed an executive order. All he did was put his pen to paper in 1940 and said, from henceforth, the armed services are integrated. Now, his cabinet minister said, don't do it. All his advisors said, don't do it. But the last word has not yet been written about Harry Truman, who was the last president we ever had that didn't have a college degree. He was a high school graduate, and yet something burned in Harry Truman that we haven't learned yet quite to understand. That presidential document has yet to be written that gives you a full insight into the complexity of Harry Truman's mind. But he, in 1948, unified, desegregated the armed forces and made for an opportunity for Major League Baseball to step forward. Major League Baseball had already stepped forward because another great event of 1944 took place that no one fully understood either. 44, Jackie Robinson getting on that bus. 1944, the Segregationist Commissioner of Baseball, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, died. Unexpectedly. No one expected. He had been a commissioner of baseball since 1920. He had run baseball. He was in charge of it. He was a segregationist. He wanted no part of integration. The 16 owners allegedly all wanted no part of integration. They wanted to keep baseball white. He died. The owners said, let's get a replacement fast and make sure he's safe. And they found in 1944 a somewhat inebriated but happy-go-lucky former senator and governor of Kentucky named Albert Happy Chandler. They said, this is the perfect commissioner. He's Southern enough, he's obviously a segregationist, and that's just what we want. And Happy Chandler was appointed the next commissioner of baseball in 1944. But of the 16 owners, there are how many now? 30 billionaires arguing with the 280 millionaires. Then it was just 16 owners who had baseball as their only means, mostly as their means of income. And they didn't want to tamper with that. They wanted to leave that alone and keep it the way it was. And that meant keeping the game white. All 16 owners said, yes, let's get someone safe. But one of them had a secret and didn't tell anybody. The owner of the Brooklyn Dodgers. He was a pious Methodist who prayed twice a day on his knees, and he swore that he would integrate baseball. And he went to Happy Chandler and said, what will you do if I signed a black ball player? And Chandler said, nothing. Go ahead. And in 1945, Branch Rickey found Jackie Robinson, this very, very aggressive, tough-minded, articulate, intelligent, now discharged lieutenant from the United States Army, and signed him to a minor league contract. He played the 1946 season with the Montreal Royals of the International League. In 1947, Jackie Robinson became the first black in 75 years to set foot on a Major League Baseball team. That was a transformative event also. One other transformative event nobody understood and nobody really cared about. And that was an event signed, a bill signed by President Roosevelt, also in 1944, in order to avoid the possible unemployment of a few 100,000 soldiers coming back from the war that we were going to win, obviously, by 1944. FDR signed a bill called the Servicemen's Readjustment Act. It was given a popular shortcut name, the GI Bill, and it promised financial support, scholarship aid for any soldier who wanted to go to college when he came back. The American Legion loved it. They sponsored it. They expected 200,000 American soldiers to come back, enough to avoid a possible unemployment problem. 7 million American GIs came back and went to college. And that changed everything, because they didn't just stop at college. They went on and got PhDs, some of them, with the Fulbright program providing the first year. And from then on, starting in the 1950s and 1960s, new names began appearing on the Tufts College campus and other college campuses. The country-educated Protestant white male majority gradually retired, and suddenly people named Markopoulos, Ungen, Gittleman, Simchis, Harleston, Palyabinskas, Luria, McCarthy started appearing on college campuses, particularly on this one. Former First Lieutenant George Markopoulos, who took his GI money, went to Bowdoin in 1953, got a Harvard PhD. How many of you have had a course with George Markopoulos? Not that many, I'm surprised. Okay, but a defining teacher in the history department here. He arrived in 1961. 1961, George Markopoulos was the first non-Protestant ever hired by the history department. The first. 1961. But then soon after that, he was followed by names like people like named Solomon, Drachman, Ueda, Sherwin, Marone, Gill, and many others. And the teaching of history, These were all urban-bred kids. They were not country-bred kids. They were from the cities, and they took a whole new view of American history. It was archival, and it was based on the other favorite word of Jerry Gill, evidence. You must have evidence to prove your point. If you don't have evidence, you can't make history true. So history then changed with archival information. Eventually, Custer gave way to Bury Me at Wounded Knee, and we learned a new view of how America actually was conquered from sea to shining sea. In 1956, a Berkeley historian named Kenneth Stamp, a veteran, and a faculty member now, wrote a book called This Peculiar Institution, a History of Slavery. It was the first academic book, 56, written that took an archival view of what slavery had been all about in the United States. Something was happening that was going to give us a new vision, but something else was happening. We were tampering with American myths. And here you are now in 2022, and the struggle for the narrative of American history is still going on. That battle is going on. Who owns the telling of American history? Who gets to say what actually happened and what didn't happen? So tampering with American myths is a problem. The pushback started instantly then. The battle for the hearts and minds of America, and that's going to be played out in elections now in 2022 and 2024, because that's what it's all about. It may be about economics, it may be about which country is going to dominate the world, but it's also about how you want to describe the nation that you're living in. And that's why I thought the Ken Burns picture of the United States in the 1930s was interesting, because in the 1920s, 1930s, you could have 20,000 KKK members in their white robes marching down the main street in front of the Capitol in Washington, D.C. You could have any number of lynchings going on in the South. You could have American GIs coming back from the war and get lynched in their uniforms. Anything could happen in the United States, because that's who we were at that time. We didn't write about it, we didn't talk about it, but that is who we were. So America was changing in the 40s, and that sense of where it was going to go began causing problems for Americans. Ultimately, we got to deal with it, but the thin edge of the wedge was 1944 to 1947, from the time the GI Bill was signed to the time Jackie Robinson appeared in a white and blue uniform of the Brooklyn Dodgers in Ebbets Field. Tranquility. My daughter doesn't like me saying tranquility and civility don't go hand in hand with progress and change. We are living in a changing world. You will continue to live in a changing world. If I had a choice of what world did I live in as a minority, would I rather live in the 1930s of Henry Ford and Charles Lindbergh and Father Coughlin, or live on a college campus like Tufts right now? There's no question what my answer would be. I believe deep in my heart that I am living in the best of all possible times, that it could never be as good for me, given where my parents came from and what they thought they were coming out of. Nothing could be as good as what's happened to me in the last 50 years of my life. Jackie Robinson retired in 1956 after a distinguished career. He got into the Hall of Fame in 1962. Along with, in 1972, Robinson died the same year that the first dark-skinned Latino died and was going to get into the Hall of Fame, Roberto Clemente. In baseball, whether it was Cooperstown or on the playing field, it was the color of your skin that made the difference. And Roberto Clemente was the first dark-skinned Latino who made it into a career that led ultimately to Cooperstown, and really was a transformative figure in the whole history of the United States. And that's where we are. That's where we are. And the question that you have to get asked now, and that maybe you'll have some comments on when we go back to Ted right now, is where do you think you're living? Is it the best of times? Is it the worst of times? Or is it somewhere else? I've already told you something I usually don't do, give you my opinion. I believe that I am living in the very best of times. Now the floor is yours. Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay.
All right, the man hasn't lost his fastball, which is great. So we've got a few minutes for questions.
Yeah.
Anyone, and I think we have a microphone going around in the back.
Anything goes.
Yeah.
If you got something that you think is embarrassing, ask it.
Professor, thank you. I actually took many of your courses, and going back today, I really felt invigorated and youthful, even though I don't look it anymore. It was really tremendous. Thank you. I'd like your comments on Title IX, if you will, right?
Title IX.
Yeah, where that's going, and certainly the progression of all of that. Obviously, I think living in one of the best times, I agree with you. And certainly women's athletics and the progressions going on. Still a lot of work to do, but I'd love your thoughts on that.
We have got, it's depending on if your tank is half filled or half empty. Title IX was so necessary. I mean, I went to college at the time when women's basketball teams, they ran around in bloomers, could take one dribble, and they had to get rid of the ball. There was no women's softball like there are now, throwing 80, 90, 100 miles an hour. It was a totally different world of women's athletics and equity on the college campus. So I think Title IX was one of the rare events in American history, an intelligent piece of legislation, because we don't do too many of them. We never see the unforeseen consequences. There are unforeseen consequences now as we get into the new gender world. You know, when I was a kid growing up, I used to look at Babe Didrikson and say, that is one hell of an athlete. Then I read her memoir, and she said the pain she suffered for being called in front of fans, dyke, lesbian, queer, all of that stuff. She went through hell in the 1930s, 1940s. I think she won 5 medals in Los Angeles in 1930. She was a tremendous athlete, Babe Didrikson. She would have a hard time now with these issues of gender. She was athletic. She just looked great, and it would be an interesting thing to see the two ages come together in a description. Title IX as legislation was absolutely essential. But as happens in America, we take 3 steps forward, and then we take 1 step back. We just lose sight of the fact that we're still 2 steps ahead. We are so much better off now than we ever would have been with women's athletics on the college campus, professional ranks, everything. Billie Jean, Chrissy Everett, all of that stuff. Bobby Riggs, the jerk, all of that. And we got through it and came to a new point now. But there will be big issues that will drag us back 1 more step. So I'm a big cheerleader. I think the gender issues are, and the terminology, even the pronouns, are going to cause us trouble, and because people basically don't like it. They don't mind the legislation, they don't mind getting ahead, they don't like the gender issues.
So I'd add here at Tufts, where we won the Learfield Cup as the best of 400 schools in Division III last year, we did it on the backs of our women athletes, who are just incredible, and scored a whole lot of points. Question in the middle. Oh, we have one in the back, and then one in the middle. Sorry, you'll be next.
I have a question. So I was interested to hear your point of view. We used to have one source of information in the 30s through movies. Now, of course, you talk about this being the best of times. We've got millions of sources of information, completely unvetted and have an interesting impact on our country.
Right.
And I'm curious, I love your optimism, but I love as you look ahead where you think that's going.
The best of times and the worst of times. I've also said the only thing that changes is technology. Human nature hasn't changed in the 6,000 years that we're able to find out what human nature is all about. That's all we know. We don't know anything about what the Neanderthals thought, the Cro-Magnons. We know nothing. We know there are 120 different primates. Only one of them is naked and has got no hair. That's us. Our brains got bigger. We've invented new things, and our technology has taken us to the point of danger and scariness. It will not change. When I arrived at Tufts, I had 30 sheets of carbon paper and a Smith Corona portable typewriter. I had to learn all this stuff. I used to think the Columbia Encyclopedia was the last word in knowledge. It was $19. I used to give it to my students. That was 1994. Between 1994 and 2000 came the internet, and now I'm hung out to dry. Every time I press a button, there are 4 million. I mean, I went up the other day and looked up Antichrist, just for the whole sense, because mean, religion is a major force around the world. I looked up Antichrist. 27 million sources I had in a second. So faith and the internet are exploding. Faith is somewhere buried in what we call either the brain or the mind or wherever. And where it's all going to go, I don't know. But technology is the big changer. One technology, movable type, got us the newspaper and the book. And now the internet is killing both. That's the way life is. And technology will either be a tool of good or a tool of bad. But it's going to keep going until we either blow ourselves off the earth or we do something else.
Just a follow-up, Sol, to that question. What do you think the impact of technology is on baseball with pitch clocks and maybe umpire robots and?
I am a troglodyte in that one. I got ERA, batting average, and 3 or 4 other things that I do. I don't know ball trajectory, exit velocity. I don't do any of that stuff. You know, but I'm the old. I am the ancient. I am the decrepit. On the other hand, they're building ballparks with the teacups.
Yeah.
I mean, you got a guy like Aaron Judge, he's 6'7.5", 282 pounds. You're going to need a separate room at Cooperstown for him. None of these guys, he's already bigger than anybody. Aaron, DiMaggio, Musial, Williams, none of them are that size. So, you know, baseball metrics, what Andy taught these guys, they needed to have. And getting smarter than Casey Stengel was when he let Ralph Terry pitch to Mazeroski, or Charlie Dressen when he let Branca pitch to Thompson. That was stupid. Metrics would have taught him.
Wouldn't have happened today. Yeah.
He didn't do it, and that's it. But to go too far, I can't do it. I'm not interested.
Okay. Question in the back.
Yeah.
Yep. Just shout it out. There we go.
So I fully expected you to spend some time, 20 minutes or so, talking about Aaron Judge, exit velocities. That'll come later.
No.
But my question is really about the important point you raised about tampering with the American myth. And when I was a kid growing up, a few decades after you as a Yankee fan, what I heard from my heroes, people around me that I respected, including my parents, was that Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier because he was a 4-star athlete. Finally, a black man was good enough to play in the major leagues. And the pictures of him as a long jumper and basketball player and football player. The reality was, as you said, he was able to break the color barrier when the white people let him do that. So my question to you is, since, as you said, we still hold accountability for telling these narratives to our children and grandchildren, what is the bottom line? What is the narrative that we should be telling about why Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier? And I want to be able to quote you on this when I tell this to my children and grandchildren.
Arguable that he was not the greatest black candidate available. He had what Branch Rickey was looking for. He was ferocious, he was feral, he was a very violent ball player, but he was also smart enough to control it. And when Rickey told him, you have to keep your mouth shut and your spikes out of people's legs for 2 years, he said, I can do that. He found him. But also, Robinson prayed twice a day on his knees. So you had these 2 Methodists praying together every day. He had Rachel. It was Rickey's insight into what Robinson had. They didn't want Satchel Paige, womanizer, drinker, having a good time in New Orleans. They didn't want, Monty Irwin was a little too old. This guy had it all for the moment. He could control himself. He was good enough to make it in the major leagues. The black ball players in the National League, in the organized black leagues, were unhappy. They didn't like Robinson. Robinson lectured them. Stop running around with women. Stop drinking too much. Train more. They didn't like Robinson. He was not a likable guy for them. He was the right guy for Rickey and the right guy for MLB. So it's a complicated story why it turned out to be Jackie. He was a great all-around athlete, and he came at the right time. Jesse Owens was a great athlete, great track man. 1936, he won all those medals in Berlin. He goes back to a campus of Ohio State, couldn't get a room on the campus, no blacks allowed. A different time. The right time, the right player, the right characteristics.
Thanks.
Right-handed pitcher, 1963? Okay.
You look great, though.
Best part of you is Robin Gittleman.
Oh, yes. My wife.
We're talking about the best of times. I might not agree with that right now, but
Well, I only said for me. For me.
beauty
Not,
of what's
oh,
happened.
yeah, me, a world filled with refugees and people dying and wars? No. But for me, I found the right place at the right time. Go ahead.
The best, needed a course to graduate. And I went to your course, and it was great. And, you know, all this baseball, all this honoring you, you were a great professor, provost. All right, so
I
my
gave you
question
a
is this. The beauty of what's happened today is the chase for 62, Aaron Judge. That's the only good news that I see. But my question to you is the three best players of all time, in my judgment. Ted Williams, Mickey Mantle, Willie Mays. I want you to tell us all, since you know everything, what is their, each one, what is their middle name?
Ted Williams' middle name was Lousy Fielder. He was not, he might arguably could be the best left-handed hitter, but if I needed a hit, I don't want Williams up there. He walked 143 times one year. He would not swing at a pitch outside the strike zone.
What's his middle name?
I got it, Sol.
Theodore?
Samuel.
Samuel. All right, Mickey, what's Mickey's middle name?
Wait a minute.
Charles.
Mickey Charles Mays.
All right, Willie Mays, what's his middle name?
I don't know Willie Mays.
Howard.
Willie Howard Mays. Mays is one of the three greatest.
Those are really important
But Mantle
questions.
is not. Another thing about
Thank you,
them, though,
Sol.
the
Thank
Hall
you.
of Fame. The Hall of Fame is a place where morality is supposed to count. They let them in. The Clark family created this thing about morality and high quality. Mickey Mantle, Ted Williams, two of the worst fathers and husbands ever to put a uniform on. We don't know about Willie Mays yet. But they were three great ball players. I argue with you about being the greatest.
Okay.
I'd have to think about it. Mays would be one of them.
Okay, we have a question over here in the baseball
Ball player,
section.
yeah.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether you think steroid users or suspected steroid users should be.
All right, you want an opinion. I'm going to give you an opinion, all right? An opinion. I think they know very little about the impact of steroids on a lot of different things. I don't think they know if Piazza ever used it or not. They don't know how many Hall of Famers are already in who use steroids. Barry Bonds is arguably one of the three greatest ball players ever. You know, he used them. He never tested negatively yet. We still don't have a negative test on him. No question that he used it. What do steroids do? We know it can bulk you up. It can make you stronger, and it can kill you. Does it take? It has nothing to do with eye-hand coordination. There were times that Bonds would see one pitch a day and hit it out. So I am very much supportive of any position that says, let him in. I also have a picture from the 1939 Yankee Stadium with a sign about 20 feet up in the air that says, no betting. That was in every major league ballpark. And to keep Pete Rose out, and to do what we're doing now, having betting odds of over and under on every game that you see on television, I think is criminal. I think Rose is another one of these stupid, wife-beating, ignorant, rotten fathers who should be in the Hall of Fame.
Maybe we could
amazing how
have
many
a
of them are in
wing
there.
for them, maybe. Andy in the back.
Hi, Sol. Thanks so much for your talk. So as an alum of your American National Pastime class, I'm wondering if you just give us a quick overview of sort of like the history of that class, of how it got started, how the format might have evolved some over the years, and looking back now, what are your overall impressions, having guided me and many other fortunate ones through that seminar?
I was just fortunate to have the opportunity to be able to teach it. I was lucky enough to be able to get the history department, the English department, the political science. I taught in about 9 different departments only because I was so old and I was a generalist. But the baseball course was great, great fun to culminate a career. I was very lucky.
Okay, I think we have time for one more
Yeah,
question.
okay.
And over there.
I'll be
Just
around anyway.
Wait for the mic.
Jackie Robinson was number 1. Who is number 2, and what was his impact?
The second was probably Larry Doby. The second one was actually Dan Bankhead, who was he never made it. The second great ball player was Larry Doby in the American League. The one that the Negro players wanted themselves, Negro League players wanted, was Monty Irvin, who was with the New York Elite Giants. Turned out to be a great, but he was 31 already. He was a little too old. Robinson was 28, and the 3 years makes a big difference. Even now. So that Robinson had everything that was going to be going good for him for 3 or 4 years. Irvin was just a little too old. And of course, Satchel wanted to be number 1, but Ricky knew Satchel Paige. Everybody knew Satchel Paige. Satchel Paige was the Babe Ruth of the black leagues. He was a personality, and Ricky didn't want that. He wanted somebody who was intelligent that could keep under control. And Robinson had Rachel and everything else. She's still alive. She's 101. Rachel Robinson. Brilliant, intelligent, great woman.
We could probably do this for another couple of hours,
Okay.
but we do have to go across the way. So let's.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sol.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Sol.
All right. Woo. We got through it.
And we're going to continue the festivities right across the street. So hopefully everybody can join us, and we'll head over across the street. Thank you.